And now we will continue the financing journey and enter into the equity session. So maybe some of you participants, which are still unknown, but please continue to ask questions as you are doing it, and continue. We will have hopefully quite a bit of time for Q&A at the end. And the ones that have probably come a bit on your way and you managed to get some grants, potentially if someone is here that managed to get from the EIC, and now you are continuing to grow and you need to take the next step, you basically are in need of some equity to help your business fly or stay on the ground, depending. But in any case, you need some additional money from external investors, and venture capital is probably one of the most prominent words you hear when it comes to this. And of course, not only space, but more in general, also when speaking about startup financing and equity. And what we hear is that, yes, Europe is lagging behind, and how can we tackle this gap? And I will introduce you to my colleague at the European Investment Fund. So for those of you who are not familiar with the European Investment Bank group, so indeed it's the group we typically speak about. And then on the one hand, we have the European Investment Bank, and then we have the European Investment Fund. So without any more introduction on that side, I will say welcome to David Dana, who is the head of the VC investments at the EIF, who has been working quite extensively with the innovation space equity pilot that was also mentioned by Mavi previously. So David, if you just want to introduce yourself and how do you actually work from the EIF side with the space startups, taking an indirect approach, and in particular the instruments that you have, how you co-invest, and so on. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Maya, and thanks for having me today. As Maya, so my colleague from the IB, just explained, I'm working for the European Investment Fund, which is a long-term partner of the European Commission and other, I would say, capital providers to support the innovation and job generation within EU. Very early on, and maybe as a starting point, it would be useful to give a bit of background on what we do and how we do it, so that I can also make the link with this in space pilot. We are an intermediated player, meaning that we almost never intervene directly towards companies or projects, but more systematically through financial intermediaries. These financial intermediaries are of two categories. One, which is taken care by a department within EIF, which is a regular type of banks and bank institutions, to which we can provide guarantees so that they can lend money to innovative SMEs at quite advantageous conditions. I'm involved actually in the other business of the EIF, which is what we call our equity investments. But still here, we are doing it in an intermediated mode, meaning that we have two investment teams taking care of investing into funds, investment funds of two categories. One team that we called internally our lower mid-market team, which is focusing on small buyout and mezzanine type of funds, and the department for which I work, which is called ITI, which stands for Innovation and Technology Investments. And here, basically, we are covering the full spectrum of financing for startups by investing into VC funds. We have been doing that for more than 25 years now. We are the largest LP in Europe, having invested in more than 600 VC funds. And on average, now we are investing more than 1.5 billion euros of new commitment every year into VC funds. In order to do so, as you understand, we are acting as a fund of fund, but in order to do so, we do not have a legal entity type of closed-end funds to make those investments, but we are managing various sources of money, which all have their own specificities and objectives, not only financial ones, but also the policy objectives, which are of the highest importance for us. So when we are looking at investment proposals, we are always trying to make to find a proper balance between those two objectives. And one of these sources of money that we were managing is indeed Innofin, which, as Stefan just explained, was a broader product than a space only. But there was this pilot within it, which was a 100 million euros pilot. And I speak about it in the past tense because it was linked to the Horizon 2020 budget, meaning that the product has now come to an end. But hopefully in the coming months, as already mentioned, with the InvestEU, we will have additional resources to support the sectors of strategic importance for the European Union. So coming back to this Innofin space pilot, it was a 100 million euro program designed to support the space ecosystem. Again, as I said, doing it in an intermediated mode meant that we did it mainly through VC fund investments. There we had, I would say, a dual approach. One which was to select a few purely, I would say, and fully specialized investment funds into space. We didn't have a huge pipeline, but we saw very interesting things. And at the end, we selected two players. One, which is Primo Space, so an Italian technology transfer fund, and the second one being Orbital Ventures. And we have Pierre, who will be talking with us in a couple of minutes. Then we also decided that it was a very good option to also back, I would say, more generalist deep tech funds in a way that not only we would allocate money to them, hoping that they will make investment into space, but we first qualified them as relevant investors into space companies. And we will have Ingo with us from Unternehmertum, a German player who actually has a pan-European reach and which is a deep tech fund, but with also a particular focus on space. And that's how indeed they became eligible for the program and how they got financing from EIF. And part of the overall financing came from the Innofin space pilot. The last option we had also to support the ecosystem was to make co-investments. And in this regards, we have with us Rafal, who is the CEO of a company that I'm sure you all know well, this Finnish company called IceEye, into which we have been investing also in a co-investment, in the context of a co-investment alongside another fund, which is not I would say a deep tech fund specifically, or at least not a fully specialized space-focused fund, a fund in Poland called OTB, alongside which we co-invested in this opportunity, which really was of the highest interest for us. So this was a bit about presenting who we are, what we do, and especially making the link with this Innofin space pilot, keeping in mind also that, as I mentioned, we also are managing a couple of other resources in terms of investment capacity. One of them is called the Luxembourg Future Fund, and this is something which has been designed to support the diversification of the economy of Luxembourg together with the National Public Bank of Luxembourg, called SNCI. And here we have been also making a couple of co-investments into space companies, including IceEye again, and also into another one that you know well, I guess, Spire Global. So Maria, if you want.
Thank you, David. Yes, indeed. I mean, this innovation space equity pilot has been a real success. And I see also that many of you have asked about the potential continuation of it. And there are ideas, but it's still under negotiation. But of course, from our side, we are very happy with what has been achieved so far. And you need to demonstrate that you are able to scale up as well. So whatever will happen in the future, this has been a real success so far. And as David mentioned, they also do, or they have done investment in a company that you most likely know very well, and that is very famous at these days in the space community. So I guess it doesn't need any more introduction. I can just say that we are extremely, extremely happy to have Rafal with us here today. So the thing with private finance, it's a bit of a virtual circle, right? The more you get, and the more you are able to grow. So right now, Isa, you probably sit in a very good position to continue the journey. But I mean, if you just look back, how did it all start for you? And yeah, please explain the audience how your financing journey has been going. Thank you
Sure.
very much.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me over here. It's a great pleasure, and indeed it's also we're proud of all the achievements of ISA, and very happy to share that story and encourage others to follow our steps, because I think we've managed to go through and try out many of those paths, and it definitely seems that but some of them do work. So that's very encouraging. Um, I think with during this conference, or at least past few hours, we've touched on most of the things that we've done in the past. Some of those instruments are a little bit newer than I think Incubed, particularly, that's the one that I'm very familiar with. It started actually a few years after we were already a relatively large company. Now, what happened on our end is indeed we started from a grant. I even saw, maybe I will refer to a question that I saw on the chat being asked about what if an SME is not able to spend 3 to 4 million sensibly, but is looking for something like 200 to 500,000. I can say that it's interesting because our first grant was actually 50,000. So the first grant that we've ever received, that was a university grant, that was 50,000 euros. Then that took us to a grant that was a 600,000, which is exactly what this particular person is looking for. Then we took a grant of 1.3 millions. This were merged grants, and then we actually got the Horizon 2020, which was mentioned over here, and I do think that it's a wonderful instrument. Then moved a little bit away from the grants, after we passed sort of a stage of technology development. Those grants were mainly used to de-risk the technology part. That's relatively tricky to finance, at least from my perspective, with VC financing. You usually want to kind of enter the VC financing market once you've got the tech sorted, or at least mostly sorted. And that's when we started looking for private financing, and we did Series Seed A, B, and recently C, having Innofin funds join us, which we are very happy. We were very happy to see that. Indeed, there's been quite a long conversation kind of in the European forum about are we ensuring that there is continuity for some of the companies to move from university to startup? Yes, we've seen that, but what about startup to scale up, and then scale up and further? Are we doing things around there? And I think this particular direct investment was an excellent example. We were very pleased to see that all our other investors, both European as well as the ones from other parts of the world, were very happy to see EIF participate. I guess the only thing that I will say is I wish that fund was larger. But I'm sure people that at EIF also wish it was larger. So I guess here we are on the same page with David. So that was our story. The last round was close to $90 million, 87 to be exact, and that total financing of $152 million. And I think maybe I will close with a certain remark that I guess as we look at the stories of different new space companies, we can quite quickly figure out how much money it takes them to really get to a place where it's probably maybe most of you guys estimate that, but it's true. ISA hasn't reached a place of profitability yet. We're probably about 2 years away. Generally, that's not the key thing to strike for. That's not our goal number one, and there is a longer conversation that we can have about this. But nowadays most of companies like ours are focused on growth, so there is an excessive, maybe not excessive, but a very large spending around the R&D part of the house in order to accelerate the revenue growth a few years down the line, and that's well understood by the investors too. But what I want to say is you've got to go through hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's not just true for ISA. If you look at companies that have passed us, like Planet, like Rocket Lab, like Spire, most of the big companies that ultimately ended up being successful have gone through hundreds of $millions in financing, which I guess states something about the size of the funds that should be available in order to make several of those companies successful, right? Because also at the end of the day, not every single investment will turn out to be successful.
Yes, yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Rafael. I will ask David. Do you want to ask Rafael any questions or any clarifications from the EAF side?
Well, I think we know well each other now, but I think maybe for the sake of the audience, I would say what was the main rationale for getting some financing from, I would not say from EIF specifically, but knowing that it was coming directly from the European Commission, because there's always, I would not say a political, but maybe a geopolitical aspect when it comes to that type of public financing. And you briefly mentioned this, but it would be happy to hear a bit more about the way it was perceived, especially by non-European investors, which are on your cap table.
Right. So, I think this generally follows sort of even more broader or more broad eyesight strategy. Some of you may know that among the 250 people that we've got on board, we have 40 different nationalities, and we've always seen a lot of strength in that diversity, and that truth or that let's say concept applies equally as much to financing. So it turned out to be so, and I guess it's not it's sort of driven by circumstances that most of our early financing was coming out of the Bay Area, so Silicon Valley. Series A and seed and most of B round were led by investors that were based out of the San Francisco area, which made my life quite difficult for the first few years because I had to stay up late to catch up on all the calls with them. Now what they've actually seen is every space company almost by default, because the satellites are covering the whole globe, at least let's assume most of them, it's a global company from the market perspective. So it's good for a company like that to have diversity in who are the investors within it, and because they bring different approaches, but also they bring different networks and connections and ability to influence. And in this particular case, we were very happy to establish a much stronger connection with the European Commission and the European institutions overall. There is if you look at the market analysis, basically 80% of the market is distributed between Europe and United States. Having a foothold in both of those economies is very important. And plus, we actually do believe that through that collaboration, we will be able to help shape some of the instruments that are coming up for the new companies and help boost the European part of space economy.
Thanks, Rafael.
Thank you very much. Indeed, this is something we discuss often as well, the Europe versus the US angle. And then, Rafael, do you have any final words or any final tips you could give to the audience here looking for any type of situation that you might have encountered and overcome? Any
final tips? I've been looking. I've been sort of glazing at the questions on the side, and I guess I will have hard time answering all of them, but there are some common denominators for all of them, and guys, I can tell you that we did certain things that made it more difficult for us to raise financing at the beginning, and I guess even if you're based in Europe, we actually looked at the market from somewhat geographically limited perspective first. And I'm not saying that there is, if you're in Europe, you shouldn't look in Europe. I think what I'm trying to say is you should look globally regardless of where you are based. And that was an important thing for us, and it quickly resulted in funds from all around the world joining our cap table. And in the US, it's not only the Bay Area, right? Their funds are spread all across the United States, and so they are across Europe. There's a ton of funds in the Nordic, there's a tons of funds in the South, and obviously they are kind of very distributed. So I will say that the financing journey or getting the financing is one of the harder parts. Very often for the engineer founders, the belief is that the tech is the harder part, but you are an engineer, so that the tech naturally should be the easier part. Getting the funding is almost equally as important, and it's very often the reason why companies succeed or fail. So be honest with it and focus an appropriate amount of time on getting it done. It's like anything else. You won't get your product built unless you dedicate time to it, and you won't your money raised unless you dedicate time to it. And I'm serious about it. You've got to dedicate full time. It's a full-time job. Raising financing is a full-time job. It is said that CEOs do three things: set visions, hire people, and raise financing. While you're not hiring or setting vision, raise financing. So that's for sure the case. And don't underestimate any of the contacts. We have almost certainly in every single round of our financing raised money from people that we at the early days thought that it would have never been the right investors for us, and then it turns out that they are, and then they sometimes lead. So I guess not a silver bullet, but I hopefully something of help.
Yeah, definitely something of help. And of course, I mean, in there is no silver bullet in any way. So thank you very much for sharing your story, and I'm sure the audience would continue to ask you questions. But I think we will have to move on. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So, as David mentioned, that there are basically two avenues that the innovation space equity pilot has been taking. So, on the other side, we are very happy to have both Pierre Festal from Orbital Ventures and Dr. Ingo Potov from Unternehmertum Venture Capitals with us now for this the continuation of this session, which both have received funding from the EIF. And I will just check. So, Pierre, can I see you?
Hi, Maria.
Yeah, perfect. There you are. So you are Orbital Ventures, a newly established space dedicated fund. You are based in Luxembourg. Do you just want to say a few words how you came about and what you actually do?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, we are Orbital Ventures, a relatively new early stage venture capital fund based out of Luxembourg, with also some members of the team out in the US, in Chicago and the Bay Area. We really came into existence at the initiative of the Luxembourg government and the Luxembourg Space Agency, which effectively organized a public-private partnership in collaboration with local financial institutions and strategics, and now the EIF, which just made a commitment to the fund. Why Luxembourg? Luxembourg has been building a space industry and space ecosystem for a number of decades now, and has been relatively successful at doing so, and has welcomed some of the defining space and satellite companies of the last 40 years, like SES, and more recently has been very vocal an important backer of all the new space companies, with companies like Spire having established a significant presence in Luxembourg. The manager that the Luxembourg authorities and government decided to select to manage this fund is a US VC fund manager called Promus Ventures. Promus Ventures has been around for about eight years and has been investing in early stage deep tech startups. And as part of that, started investing and backing new space companies in a circa around 2013, 2014, has been quite successful at doing so, having backed companies like Rocket Lab, Spire, ISci on the upstream side of things, and a whole bunch of companies leveraging space technologies to build products and services, particularly around Earth observation, communications, navigation, and mapping. So companies like Mapbox, Cape Analytics, and Enview. So it made a lot of sense for the Luxembourg authorities and institutions who are very commercially minded when it comes to investing and finding the right managers for this to partner with Promus Ventures. So we are established in Luxembourg and in the process of building a 5-people team. I'm here on the ground to do that, and then we have the partners, my partners in the US. Our mandate is, is pretty typical of a early stage venture capital investor. We focus on relatively early stage companies, either at seed or Series A, and selectively back companies which are going through expansion stages from Series B and later stage. The remit is pretty broad. We invest in any type of company that is impacted and leverages space technologies to build products and services, which a lot of people may not realize has profound impact on the way the world works and the world economy. So we have a relatively broad mandate. We are investing and deploying about 2/3 to 70% of the fund in the European Union. We are primarily backing homegrown innovation and trying to find local champions. We also actively supporting and promoting the ecosystem here in Luxembourg. And really encouraging our portfolio companies to come and set up a presence in Luxembourg, which is extremely supportive of space tech companies. And then we invest opportunistically in the rest of the world. But given our roots, the roots of Promus Ventures in the US, we have a particularly strong network and track record in the US. So that's really, what we're about. We've made 4 investments to date, 2 in the US, 2 in Europe. Investments spanning the whole space ecosystem and value chain, including ground terminals, robotics, and then on the application side, Earth observation and tracking and software infrastructure for geospatial data sets. And we really interested in to hear from ambitious entrepreneurs across Europe primarily and beyond, who are looking to capitalize their businesses.
Thank you, Pierre. A very quick question. So the total value of the fund, maybe I missed it, or did you mention? And also the type of what type of tickets you said the early stage.
So the total value of the fund, I cannot communicate too much on this until we reach a final close. But we did a 70 million euro first close at the beginning of last year, almost exactly a year ago, and we are in the final stages of closing the fund, which will be well in excess of 100 million euros. In terms of ticket size, there's no typical ticket size, even though anything below 1 million euros becomes a bit difficult and inefficient and under optimizes from a portfolio construction standpoint. And then we can go up to several million at the first investment, and we tend to reserve 50% for follow-ons.
Okay, and then final question: How do companies get in contact with you and your fund?
Well, you can ping us here at promusventures.com or via the website. Or via the good people at EIF, EIB, Luxembourg Space Agency, and a whole list of Rafal at ISI, who's also one of our portfolio companies. I think there's many ways to get to us, but I think the best one is to shoot me an email.
Super. Thank you very, very much. And then we will move on to a more generalist fund who has also received funding from the EIF. So Unternehmertum Venture Capital and Ingo Potov is here with us. Do you just want to introduce yourself, a few words?
Yes, sure. Hello. Yes, I'm Ingo Potov. I'm one of the managing partners and founders of UVC. That's easier to spell than Unternehmertum Venture Capital Partners, so that's the long version. So I myself, I'm in the venture capital business for 20 years now, started in 2000, investing globally across Europe, Silicon Valley, Israel a lot, as well as Asia. Did seed investments, growth investments, primary, secondary, all sorts of stuff. I have a background in computer science, worked serious in enterprise software and strategy and M&A, before then getting to the venture capital business in 2000, and now for 10 years with UVC. UVC is an early stage venture capital firm. We're investing in seed stage, early stage companies. So what a generalist firm, as you say, means that we are investing in, well, technologies in general, IT, communication, whatsoever, not life science. But we have a certain focus on B2B business models. We only very selectively do consumer type of investments. So rather for marketing purpose, I would say we differentiate between industrial technologies, enterprise software, and mobility. So we are very opportunistic within this space. But we have certain strengths when it's industrial, when the customers are enterprises. Space is a part of it. I mean, by our nature, we have been more focusing on the downstream type of technologies. But we have been moving also towards upstream as we see some significant changes in the markets.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and very interesting for us to have you here as a generalist fund still investing in space, or I would maybe not add still, but investing in space. Because what might be important for space companies here today to understand is that there are interest also from non-dedicated space funds. And I mean, in your fund, do you have any particular view on space take vis-a-vis other technologies and focus areas?
Let's say in general, so we are forced to address companies which can become very large. So the fund size we are currently operating out of is, well, we're targeting 200 million fund volume. We are not there yet, but we are close to that. But let's assume we are getting there, meaning we will build a portfolio of 25 companies. We can start with a couple of 100,000 up to 5-6 million first investment, always with follow-on reserves up to 10 or in the extreme 20 million for a company. But with that type of strategy, we need to be able to invest in global players or founders who eventually can become global players. So, and that's basically, it boils down to a strong team with a compelling vision and a huge market. And then, of course, there are other things. How much are you differentiating? What are the terms you invest in? All these of things, but the team, the vision, and the market that drives the potential. And so we're looking at these type of business ideas and teams. So space is getting to be one of the areas we're looking at. So it's going there. Historically, for us, when space was a governmental game, and very niche. I worked in telecoms 20 years ago for a telecom operator, and I followed the horrible setup of Iridium satellite networks back then. It was extremely expensive, and a call did cost, I don't know, $5 for a minute. It was just not a service, not a mass market service. So what we did see in recent years, for us as a not insider in that industry, that it's get a commercial touch, and it's going commercial. I don't want to say so. So in IT, people talk about democratization of certain technologies. I don't want to speak of democratization of space technologies, but there's so many ideas about applications in the future. So, I mean, it's a long way to go, but we see the concrete demand already for certain applications, so that we believe this indeed can be a mass market in a couple of years. And that's attractive for us. So we need to address huge markets, and space can be one. But it's not just the size of the market. And what's also a challenge is the complexity, the regulation of the market. And that's still something the space market needs to develop. So it's still more complicated to build a business there than build something. Or I set up an enterprise software company, develop a certain minimal viable product, and then sell it to a couple of companies.
Yes, thank you very much. Very, very good and valuable insights. Do you have anything else you would like to any messages you would like to convey to the participants?
Yes, I think there are proof points for this. If we look at the amount of capital which has been invested in globally, well, the majority in the US, need to say, but also in Europe, into space-related company has massively growing over the last 10 years. So it's a clear trend. Of course, the wide majority or a substantial part went into launcher companies and satellites. But of course, you need to start with the basic infrastructure, like 20 years ago in the telecom bubble. Massive amount of money went into infrastructure, even into cable, so that's the first part, but that's the fundamentals. So I think the trend is pretty clear, and all these enabling technologies we have, I think, will allow it to build much more efficient space technologies and eventually services. And make it more concrete, we have made one investment in the space, so one real space investments besides real, we have these downstream type of technologies. We have LiDAR technology. They relate to space, and they are enabling technologies potentially eventually. But we have one launcher company. It's a spin-off from the university here, Techno University in Munich. The same research unit, which, by the way, have developed the Hyperloop for Elon Musk. So out of that group of students, they developed ESA Aerospace. So we made an investment there not so long ago. The first investment, I think, 2 years ago. And it was we knew that we will need eventually, let's say, hundreds of millions in funding to build a European SpaceX company. And we said, well, we have a small fund. It was the predecessor fund of the current one, so it was much smaller. So we said, okay, we start funding, and not knowing if there is at all a chance to get follow-on funding. And things were developing. So a year ago, we made a Series A with another generalist German fund. Plus Airbus, I think we raised something like 20 million. Okay, we could continue operating. Just in Q4, we raised a 70 million round led by Lakestar, another generalist fund, historically with a consumer focus. What I want to say is there is more capital around, even from non-focused space investors. So you can argue, well, they may not have the knowledge to make the assessment. I think they made reasonable due diligences, but important message I want to say is there is more capital, more interest, and this is what we need also in Europe to build European player, because one of the reasons, in Silicon Valley, you have more ideas funded. It's not because the VCs are smarter. For sure not. I can tell you. I mean, they are smart. Don't misunderstand me, but they have more capital. If I'm sitting on a pot of 3 billion, it's so easy for me to put 1 million into an idea. It's just nothing. They don't care about it if they don't want to. I mean, many of them are. I mean, we have great co-investments with US firms, but in recent years, we have more capital in Europe. And with more capital, you can make more investments and take higher risk. And this is what we are seeing here. And also, governmental programs will facilitate and help VCs like us to allocate money to this sometimes very risky investments.
Thank you, indeed. Pierre, do you want to add anything on this? I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. I think Ingo makes a very good point that echoes with certainly our experience and what we're seeing in the market. Specifically with space, I think Europe has a very good card to play in terms of talent and also know-how and track record, because Europe has been at the forefront of the space industry for a long time, with a mix of government, institutional support, as well as private sector support. So ultimately, the main gating item here is really capital and availability of capital. And as we have seen in other sectors of technology and venture capital investing in Europe, where capital was scarce, even like 10 years ago, and now is much more plentiful with the entry of international funds into the domestic markets. We expect to see the same trend with space. Obviously, it's a fairly capital-intensive business and sector, and so capital is even more important than in some of the other sectors. So we're very optimistic for Europe, given the amount of talent and the quality of the talent. And we are really here to help, and participate in building this ecosystem alongside, institutions like EIB, EIF, and the various space agencies and governments, particularly the Luxembourg government and space agencies, who are really at the forefront of this effort.
Thank you, Pierre. Indeed, it's very good points you are both raising, and this is also something that we clearly see from the EIB side and working on it as well. So if no further comments, I will just ask David. Yes, you are there. If you have any questions for any of these gentlemen.
Actually, it's not a question. It's more a kind of statement to show to the audience as well that starting with the European Commission as a policy maker and us, EIF and EIB, as an implementation tool in a way of those policies, and our friends of Unternehmertum, and I think I hope I pronounce it well now. It took me 2 years to reach that level, so not too bad for a French guy, and Orbital and ISI. It shows that there's a strong willingness to support the market and the ecosystem. We have been active. I said earlier that we had some pipeline. We have been chasing the good opportunities to invest this Innovfin space pilot for years, meaning that we knew that with 100 million, it may appear on a standalone basis as a huge number, but if you look at the fact that we also had to build a portfolio to just also manage the risk on our side and for the commission as well. And on this, actually, there's a last fund that it's not announced yet, but we are finalizing now the legal negotiations. It will be another type of generalist deep tech fund with a partial allocation to space that will be hopefully announced, let's say, by the end of the quarter or early Q2 2021. we think that we have shown that, first of all, there is a market demand that we know. There are players on the field to fulfill that demand. For sure, they cannot do everything. They have to be selective. We ask them to be selective as we have been selective ourselves. But there is a strong political willingness and I would say human force being at work on the European space segment. So there's a lot that we can do. Europe remains at the forefront of innovation on many topics, space being one of them. If you just look at the number of engineers that we have in Europe, even compared to the US, we are still at the forefront from that standpoint as well. Now what we need is the support of people like we have here on this panel to make sure that we make the best usage possible of this money and to help European players to develop and hopefully become large international players, if not the global leaders.
Thank you, David. Thank you very, very much. And I think with those words, we thank all the participants here on the equity side. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, David.
And perhaps if you can stay a few or to the end of the session, I see already now that there are a lot of questions. So hopefully we will be able to cover at least some of them. Thank you.